So there were two finalists awarded $1,000 this year each for their work. They are ProPublica for Busted, an investigation of how people are jailed each year on the basis of unreliable $2 police kits, and also the Post and Courier for Every Other Breath, reporter Tony Barthelme's stories about the impact of global climate change. But this year's winner of the Taylor Family Award for Fairness in Journalism is the Oregonian and OregonLive for Toxic Armories, an 18-month investigation by reporter Rob Davis documenting the dangerous lead dust levels contaminating National Guard armories throughout the country. For his work, he receives $10,000, and please join me in welcoming him to accept the award and to tell us a little bit about his stories. Rob.
Thanks very much. Well, I want to thank the Nieman Foundation and the Taylor family for this recognition. I am honored and humbled. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we found digging around in the nation's armories. There are at least 1,800 in the country with indoor firing ranges in them. They were often built in unventilated basements, and they were, we found, fairly poorly maintained. What should have been firing ranges that drew air into filters either didn't have filters on them or nobody bothered to change them. And yet these buildings throughout the country were used as community centers for Boy Scout and Cub Scout meetings, for Pinewood Derbies, as daycares, inviting children into buildings that were covered in lead dust. Every time that a soldier fired a bullet inside one of these facilities, a little puff of lead came out. The primer in every bullet, which ignites the gunpowder, is made out of an explosive lead compound. And what we found was that lead vapor would get sucked into the ventilation systems of these buildings and spread throughout them. So this started in a little town called Forest Grove, about 25 miles west of Portland. And the armory there closed, and nobody could really explain quite why. They said there was some lead contamination that they needed to clean up. And our reporter in the community there did what good watchdogs do. She asked for the inspection document that they based the decision on. And when we got it, it was just absolutely shocking. The lead dust from this indoor firing range was getting dumped at the front door. It was getting sucked into clean air intakes for years and years and years. And as we started asking questions about it, we didn't get consistent answers. This quote was from an email I got through a public records request from the official who was in charge of armory maintenance, talking about me. I like to think of it as a nice personal motto. And so we wanted to figure out whether this was something that was actually happening around the country or whether it was just an isolated case of this one armory. And we had these key questions that we wanted to answer and that we knew that we had to answer if the story was to be compelling. Was it hidden? We knew that people didn't know that lead contamination was a problem in the nation's armories. Here we have a photo on the right of a desk in Berlin, Wisconsin, in a classroom that was used by pregnant women and mothers who are breastfeeding to take nutritional classes, and it was covered in lead dust. And on the left, we have what the Oregon National Guard considered its protocols for cleaning up lead dust, which is a household vacuum. Needless to say, that's not the way that you are supposed to be cleaning up. We wanted to determine whether we could quantify the scope of this problem. And so I submitted more than 100 Freedom of Information Act requests to every National Guard unit in the country and got the inspections that they conducted on every 2-year basis, which revealed that hundreds of armories, their firing ranges had been converted into office space, into classrooms, in one case a daycare, without being cleaned first. And they were still covered in lead dust. And we found more than 100 where lead had spread beyond the firing range into areas that the public used, unwittingly letting their kids crawl on the floor. When we published this, we shared the 22,000 pages of inspections that we had gotten, and reporters in 11 states localized our reporting, which was really wonderful to see. We knew that we needed to humanize the problem, and part of the issue that I faced was that nobody knew that these buildings were covered in lead, and so there was no impetus, and our local health officials didn't consider armory visits a potential source of lead poisoning. But in Helena, Montana, the Department of Environmental Quality's officials who are in charge of cleaning up toxic waste sites and who are under medical monitoring as a result moved into an old, dirty armory. This is Mary Ann Dunwell. She's a lawmaker there who used to work for the DEQ. And so they watched as their blood levels crept up higher and higher the longer that they spent in their armory, where an inspector found lead dust bunnies the size of tangerines in the HVAC system. Mary Ann brought a sandwich that she ate at her desk underneath one of the vents every day. Bosses told them, just get out and take walks if you're not feeling well. We wanted to be able to hold officials accountable. And through numerous records requests in Oregon, we got documentation. They had safety committee meetings as this problem began to unfold. A top official said, maybe we shouldn't use the word contaminated to describe our armories. Another one said, when should we tell people that we've known about this since? Somebody said, well, we've known about it since 2002. And the guy in charge said, let's say 2012. And that's what they did. And again, through very long fights for these records, we were able to prove and that they had decided to cover this up, but they kept minutes at the meeting where they decided to do it. And we wanted to know, would people care about this? I cared about it from the instant that I saw this photo in the inspection of the Forest Grove Armory. This is a shelf that was covered in lead dust in the Family Readiness Center, which is where children who would come into the armory would visit. And if it's just not clear, that's an Elmo doll sitting on the shelf. Seeing that built in me a sustained outrage that allowed me to work on this day in and day out for 18 months. I want to talk a little bit about fairness. The type of journalism that I practice is no surprises journalism. When you send public agencies 100 records requests, you're going in through the front door. There's no doubt that they know that you're coming. And we went to great lengths with the Oregon National Guard to go point by point on our findings before we published, to ensure that if something was wrong, we found out about it before we hit publish and not afterward. And I went to great lengths to engage with the National Guard Bureau, which is the overarching agency that is in charge of the nation's armories. And they completely ignored me. They treated me like I didn't exist. Phone calls, emails from the lowest public affairs person to the highest ranking officials there, nothing. It was like I was winding up in their spam filters. And yet we would get talking points sent to us that they had sent out to every state to tell them what to say when I called. We got a nationwide order that they issued requiring lead testing in more than 1,000 armories in the country before we had even published a word. And knowing that this story was coming, still, they told me, well, we'll get back to you. After we published in early December, within just a few days, they took sweeping action. They closed every armory that was contaminated by lead in the country to the public. If one of your weddings was scheduled in them and it was canceled, I apologize. 10 senators just issued a call for funding for cleanups in the Pentagon's 2018 budget, and the National Guard has closed every single one of its indoor firing ranges, and they have started now training outdoors. And so, though they didn't engage with us, their actions, I think, spoke louder than words. With that, I will wrap up and take a couple of questions if anybody has them.
Could you talk about the collaboration? You mentioned, I think, 11 local news outlets. How did that collaboration work? And given the commercial and other pressures that local news organizations are under, did they have the ability to spend 18 months on it, or?
No, they didn't. Unfortunately, they didn't have to. When we published the story, we uploaded all of the inspection reports that we had into Document Cloud and published links to every single inspection report, so that, because I knew, I grew up in Salisbury, Maryland. As I started reporting on this, I knew, I wonder what happened to the armory in Salisbury, and I knew that folks would have that question as they engaged with this. And so we wanted to be absolutely as transparent as possible and show people, this is what inspectors have found. And we wrote a story and published not only the broad investigation that we did, but a specific call for people to localize this, because it's not just an Oregon story. There are issues with armories from coast to coast. And so in many cases, I would interface with reporters, tell them what I had learned, tell them what issues were specifically going on in their states, and kind of help them along in their process.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. As a parent of a toddler, this has made my blood run cold. But I was curious. You talked a lot about also trying to put a human face on it, not just an accountability. But as a result of this, were there families and children that were tested for lead, and were there treatments? Were you able to follow up in terms of actually getting people the help that, or was there outreach in the community and sort of action in terms of treating children?
Yeah. Not really. I think 3 states instituted blood lead testing for their soldiers. The Michigan National Guard was activated last January to distribute water to Flint, and at the same time, I had given them a deadline to answer some questions, and so they closed all of their armories before that deadline came and instituted blood lead testing. They wouldn't describe the parameters of what it found. Some Oregon soldiers were tested, some soldiers in Washington State were tested. But, I think like the part of the challenge that I faced in finding the victims of this is that if your kid visited one of these when they were a year and a half old and they now have an IQ that's 3 points lower, you'll never know about it. And, it is the kind of shifting baseline that we have accepted in this country, that lead exposure is, not really a big deal. We've conducted a vast science experiment on our population by putting lead in paint and lead in gas. It's in all of our homes and in our soil. And I think this is just one more kind of additive arena in which there is another potential exposure. and another opportunity for the child to have lead in their blood, which really shouldn't be happening. I'll take one more question.
Have you put the documents that you got under Freedom of Information Act, et cetera, have you put those online and made them available to other reporters? I mean, can I go right now?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, and you can go to your local armory, click on it, pull up a description of what they found, the highest levels, when the inspection was conducted, and
Every
then.
armory has followed through?
No. There are hundreds of armories in this country that, for whatever reason, were not tested. And so that was kind of the other gap that we found. Not every state gave us their inspections, and not every state conducted their inspections because they cleaned and converted them, which oftentimes was, I think, somebody going through with a vacuum cleaner or a mop and not bothering to clean the HVAC system that would then blow more lead dust into the room. And so it has really proven to be, it's exceedingly difficult to get lead out of these buildings because it has so thoroughly contaminated them. So, thank you all very much. Thanks.